Hi, my name is James Kimber. I'm a physician assistant and founder of PA Mentor Online, bringing you the best tips and tools you'll need to get into a PA program. On this channel, we do strategy videos for pre-PA students who are thinking about becoming a PA or currently in the application process, as well as interviews with students who used our services and successfully got into a PA program. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. You don't want to miss out on any of the interviews, as it might be one of the programs that you're thinking about applying to. Or if you have specific questions about one of the interviews we've done, or just questions in general, don't forget to leave them down below in the comment section. Thank you.
Welcome to Physician Assistant Mentor Online.
Welcome back. As you can tell, I have another t-shirt. And this one's actually really nice. I like the Heather t-shirts more than the colored t-shirts. Very comfortable. The school is Mercyhurst PA program. So we recently had someone accepted into the program. Of all the interviews I probably have ever done, this is the one you really should pay attention to, especially if you're about to interview soon or anytime during the rest of this cycle. This person comes from a very non-traditional background. I don't want to really tell much of her story, but you might be surprised about some of the things, such as the number of clinical hours she had. This was her first time applying, and we hear a lot of people saying you're not going to get in your first time, and I think she's going to dispel that rumor. But I'll let her go ahead and tell the rest of her story. So thanks again for watching, but please pay attention to this interview. She has a lot of great tips that you should be paying attention to or picking up on for what you could do for your mock interview. Again, thanks for listening. I hope we can work with you too. All right, well, welcome back. Today we're interviewing somebody. It's probably a non-traditional student who has a pretty interesting story, but I'm going to go ahead and let her tell it. If you go ahead and tell us your name and which PA program you got into.
So I'm Christina, and I got into Mercyhurst University in Erie, PA, so I'm super excited.
Okay, well, congratulations. But
Thank you.
To start off with, as I said, you're kind of a non-traditional, so why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your background?
I'm actually a middle school teacher, and right now I'm teaching 7th grade math, but I've taught pretty much every subject. I've taught language arts, science, social studies, math. I've subbed all grade levels, so I have a lot of education backgrounds. And I just really like to learn. I love working with other people. And within probably the past year, I kind of decided that a provider is the better role for me because I can still educate. And I have a lot of room to grow and a lot of room to learn. And, in my free time, I'm really active. So I feel like this lifestyle is perfect for me. And, I'm just really ready to make a change.
Great. So, and you kind of addressed it, but just so we can go ahead and ask, why did you choose the career of medicine? Was this something you had thought about previously before teaching, or?
Oh, I thought about it a lot. In college, I actually changed my major probably 5 or 6 times. I kind of lost track after a while, but it was always between education and healthcare. And I always had trouble, figuring out how my strengths could play into a career because, I had strengths with both. And so I ultimately went with education, but for a while I thought of med school. And then I decided that this wasn't the route for me. And I went through a rough period in college where I kind of lost my confidence. So I went with teaching that I felt really comfortable in because, I've been in a school for all my life and it came naturally to me. So, after shadowing a lot of physicians and I saw some PAs, I ultimately became a teacher. And within actually the past year, I had 2 hip surgeries. And I had complications with that, so I got to be on that end of the receiving line, I guess. And I really got to know my PA. And I remember the one day she came into the exam room, and she was the first person I saw in orthopedics. And I'm like, oh, PA, that's really cool. Because I never really knew what they did. And that wasn't something that was pushed when I was in school. And, I thought maybe she would just take my vitals or, talk to me and get my history. But she ended up doing the exam. And she had diagnosed me with a labral tear, and that was pretty much it. And I was kind of shocked that she was able to do that. And then my surgeon came in, and he agreed with her diagnosis, and the rest was history. But at that point, I really became interested, and I'm like, wow, I can really see myself doing this. And she was really great, with patient education. And I asked her all the crazy questions in the world. And she was wonderful. So I think at that point, that's really where it sparked my interest.
So obviously you'd already completed your undergrad. Where did you do that at?
I did at Edinburgh University, which is just outside of Erie, PA.
Okay.
And I took a lot of prereqs at about 6 other colleges. But Erie was pretty much where I spent most of my time taking my classes. And just from switching my major 6 times, 6 times, I got a lot of them in before I graduated. So I just had a few extra to do at the end.
Okay. Well, so that was I'm going to ask. So obviously you decide, hey, I'm going to pursue PA. Now you need a bunch of science prereqs. So how did you go about doing that?
Actually, COVID worked in my favor because everything was online. And, being a teacher, I really didn't have this schedule where I could, work in the evenings or take classes in the evenings. So it was actually perfect. Everything was online. So I took biochem through, I think it was UC San Diego. And I took a couple of classes at Edinburgh. One was supposed to be in person, but it was online. It worked out that way. And I had surgery, so it was even more perfect. I also took a class at a community college that was supposed to be in person, but it was online. And so it worked out in my favor. I mean, obviously you want those classes to be in person, especially anatomy, but it was online for everybody. So it wasn't just me that was being affected. So it actually worked out really well.
Funny you'd mentioned that. I could not tell you how many people I've tried to express this to. They miss a class and they're looking, but they're looking in their area. And it's like, dude, it's online. You can go anywhere.
No,
It doesn't matter.
There's so much online. I mean, even the community college, it was 2 hours away.
Right.
And I'm like, I actually was going to go this fall semester, and I was going to drive the 2.5 hours after school down to Pittsburgh, and then come back at 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning. I didn't want to do that, but it was one time a week, and I was willing to put in whatever I needed to. But it was perfect, and the window, it just happened to be that section of the summer was online. So I got my microbiome, and I was thrilled. I mean, it wasn't exactly what I wanted, but I mean, I got it in, and it was a lot better than trying to teach online and put that on top of that too,
Well, again, it was funny because you said you took a course out of San Diego, and I'm just, I talk to students and but the local community colleges or local school or the local. It's like, it doesn't need to be local. Look anywhere. It could be in Montana. It does not matter.
It actually was the most affordable too.
Really? Wow.
It was probably the best science class I ever took. Because I've taken like cell molecular genetics, and it had all the bio classes basically all in one, and it just kind of synthesized everything. And I'm like, wow, this was really great. It honestly was the best course, and the professors were really great. So I mean, I highly recommend it. On Facebook groups, I've had some people talk about like, oh yeah, like, has anyone ever taken this course before? And I'm like, do it. It is so good, so good. Best class, yeah.
Well, I'll remember that for future students.
No, there's no lab with it. That's the only bad thing. But if if the program doesn't require a lab, it's perfect. And Mercyhurst did not require a lab for biochem, so it was ideal.
So coming from an academic background, did you find any of the science courses to be difficult, or was there anything that gave you trouble?
I think the chemistry was probably the hardest for me because I'm so hands-on. And even as a teacher and educator, even when I teach my kids, I try and give them hands-on materials. So for me, just doing more of the theoretical stuff and like organic chem and, gen chem, that was probably more difficult for me. I still worked my butt off and I did what I had to do. But yeah, I would say that those were harder just because it was a little bit less concrete for me. And I need something hands-on.
So let's talk about your background. So now you're pursuing physician assistant. How did you get your clinical hours?
I was able to do it at a nursing home, and it actually worked out because of COVID that I was able to work part-time. And it was nice with school because we were completely online. So I would teach online starting at, 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and then I would work until 11 o'clock at the nursing home. So I was a PCA, a patient care assistant. So it was a really ideal time to be in a nursing home because you saw the effects of the pandemic on the residents. So it really made you appreciate things. But yeah, I mean, everything kind of worked out in my favor this year. And I wasn't able to last summer just because of my hip surgery. And then I had another hip surgery this summer. So I kind of had that small window to be able to get my hours in.
Yeah.
And it was a good experience. It really was.
So if I can ask, how many total clinical hours do you have?
I think it's 270. I think it was 270, and then I got my surgery, so I haven't been able to add to that. But it wasn't very much, and that's what really freaks me out when I'm looking at all these Facebook forums.
Right.
It's like, well, I have like 5,000 hours, and I still didn't get it, and I'm like, oh my word. It makes you freak out a little bit, but it was a good lesson, and like, I'm not like every other applicant. We're all very different. We have our unique strengths, but I'm glad I didn't let it stop me because I almost didn't apply the cycle. Right. Just because I was worried about my, patient care hours, and I'm really glad I did it. But you have to be aware of the program, and I have a friend who went to Mercyhurst, and she had really similar stats to me, and she said, Christina, like, still apply, because I almost didn't.
Well, so you did mention it, so I'm going to ask you, what do you feel that your strengths were going in or applying to a PA program?
I think just being non-traditional was probably the most important part. Even though I'm not very old, I'm 25, I was a teacher, and I taught, I've taught every grade, I've taught every subject, I've taught in a pandemic, so having that educational experience is so important. And especially with the age group that I'm teaching in for the last 2 years, middle school, I have my students, and they're at very different levels of maturity, so I'm used to dealing with them in many ways. And I'm also dealing with parents. I'm dealing with administration, faculty. I mean, it's like you get just everything when you're a middle school teacher. So just being able to deal with that and being able to talk to people of all backgrounds with all issues, trying to talk to someone over a really bad issue that you don't want to talk about, and just how to approach that with someone. And you can't approach someone the same way as another person, like you have to feel that out. So it was such a valuable experience, being a part of that. And being responsible for 100 kids is a really big deal. Like, you learn a lot about talking to people and working with people. And, I think it's cool because even with new kids, I can kind of feel them out within a few minutes. Like, I know like how they're going to interact with me. Are they receptive to me? And even as a PA, like, that's what your job is going to be like. Your first impressions are everything. You have to be able to learn how to interact with your patients pretty much right off the bat. So that was probably the most valuable experience. And I know everyone wants you to say your patient care hours are like super critical, but for me, my educational experience was critical. And I brought it up pretty much every interview question. And they seemed to like it, which was cool.
Yes. I'd probably also say that your grades probably were a strength of yours.
Yeah, I would say so. I had a pretty good PA.
Yeah, and you want to go ahead and share that?
I don't like to, but I will since you asked. When I graduated undergrad, it was a 398, and I think now it's like a 399 just with the other classes I've taken. Right. My science, I think it's like a 397, but it's probably higher now. That was with CASPA, so I worked my butt off in college, and I knew regardless of what I did, whether it was teaching, whether it was healthcare, the GPA, the time management, prioritizing, it all matters. So even if you're one of those people who think, well, I have like really good grades, but not many PCE hours, like, I'm telling you, like, your grades do matter. It shows that you can prioritize, especially if you tell them about what you were doing as you were taking those classes. So, I mean, in college, I coached. So I was in middle school, I was a cross-country coach, I was active year-round. I go to bed at 8:30, Friday nights, and I get up at 4 on Saturdays. So, if you can throw that into it and show them how responsible you were, like, for me, I did that quite a bit in my interview, and they seem to like that a lot. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Discipline.
It does. Well, it takes that, and you're going to find that out real soon. But
yeah.
Well, you sort of mentioned it, but I'm just going to ask anyway. What struggles did you encounter during your application? Was it filling out CASPA? Was it getting the hours, meeting the requirements? What were some of the struggles you encountered?
It's really hard being a non-traditional and just trying to figure out the scheduling, because for me, it wasn't an option to quit my full-time job. For some people, they can, but for me, I couldn't. So I had to just basically find what I could get and make it work, which has become a strength of mine, I guess, over the last year. So I guess for me, it was just trying to find everything to work around my schedule. And my job was not easy last year. I mean, I was teaching multiple subjects all in block. I mean, I was working probably 80 hours a week just with school alone. And then putting classes on top of that, like I had to be an expert at prioritizing my time and time management. So I think that was challenging. And, just juggling classes on top of a full-time job was tough. And it's also hard too because you feel a little bit alone. Like you have all this information being thrown at you when you're looking at, Facebook pages and you're looking online and you're watching mock interviews and you're like, I have no idea what the heck is good. I don't know. But again, it's just real general information, nothing specific to you. So I just really struggle to know, like, am I doing things right? Am I saying the right thing? Like, so I think that was stressful, was not having like a personal mentor. I wish I had talked to you earlier. Just someone there because I was basically alone and I was doing everything myself. So it was kind of overwhelming in that way.
It is. It is a lot that, it's not like applying to a lot of other things where
No.
maybe just fill out an application. That's it. There's so much that goes in. And are you doing the right things, the right courses, getting the right letters, writing the right statement? There's a lot to take.
And you and I talked about this during our sessions, but I mean, there's so much information out there and a lot of it's wrong. But like whenever we interviewed, I felt like I was just like, reciting something I found on Google, and you're like, and you agree, and I'm like, all right, I'm not the only one who felt like that was awful, but that's what they're telling you to say.
Well,
I've watched mock interviews like that too.
Yeah, we call like the Reddit answer. It's like, okay, that comes from Reddit. Or...
Exactly, and I hated that, but that's what was out there. Like no one told me that. When they ask you about yourself, tell them what you really like to do. Don't tell them that where you graduated from, because that's what everyone told you to say.
Right, and nobody, of course, not the board. They're not going to say anything, so you don't know. But
Right.
you can read their body reaction. You can tell. And if you give them more about yourself, you're more personable. It should be a conversation. You can see that they're feeding off of that. And
Like, I'm not really excited to say that I want to be a PA because of lateral mobility. Like, and that's the thing is, like, when the interviewers see you're not excited, I mean, they're not going to be excited either. Like, I've had so many job interviews, and I remember a couple where I didn't want the job, but I was interviewing because I was asked to interview, and it was practice. And then I went in and I'm like, I have a horrible feeling about this. Every answer I gave sounded like I was dying or I was at a funeral. And but this, yeah, no, just don't do that. I liked what you said. You gave great advice.
so, let's say, I think everybody probably can tell, but how many times have you applied?
This was my first cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did
And
you?
really early on.
And did you? Okay, since you did talk about reading stuff, we get this a lot. At least this cycle, we're hearing this from everybody, especially the first timer, saying, "Well, I hear you're not going to get in your first cycle." Did you read that too online, or?
I read that everywhere. Like, people were telling me, you really need to give it like 2 years. First year, you really have to hope and pray. Second year, maybe you'll get lucky. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And then you hear some people who are like, yeah, I got in on the first try, first interview, or I had 12 interviews, and the information's all over the place. And really it comes down to, unless you talk to someone who can be specific to you and give you advice, that you can't really take, what you see on the internet seriously. I mean, like, I understand, like, these are people's stories and that's great, but like, you are not them. And I had to really remind myself of that, because I felt really self-conscious too, not coming from a medical background. I was never a CNA. I wasn't even certified. I was a PCA. I was uncertified. I'm a teacher. I grade papers. I'm great at student discipline. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just very, like, I was really self-conscious. And even when I saw the other interviewees, I was like, everyone's from like a biology background. I'm like, oh, wow. And it just makes you think like, okay, like, I bet that they've seen a lot more than I have. And so it's just, everyone's so different. And I don't know. It's just,
Well,
it's just different.
No. You're right. I mean, everybody, it needs to be more individualized, because everybody's different, but then every program's a little different.
Exactly.
And then not even just every program, but this cycle is different than last cycle, obviously.
Right.
So, yeah, it needs to be more personalized than just, oh, this is what somebody else wrote. Okay, I'm going to do what they say.
That made me so stressed. I wish I had just come to you right away and just not have avoided all the Facebook forums because it just made it more stressful.
So tell us about CASPA. Obviously, first experience with that. How long do you think it took you to complete your CASPA?
I started early. I made the rookie mistake of starting it in February, and I didn't realize that everything got swiped once the new cycle began, so I got to redo everything. But I mean, it is what it is. I got to practice doing it again, I guess. But I started probably doing the new one right when it opened, so I think that's like April 1st. Is it April 1st that you can start doing it?
This year is the April 30th was when it set up.
And you couldn't type in stuff earlier than that, I don't think. I can't remember exactly.
Well, actually, you can create a profile with all your basic like demographics. You can even enter in all of your transcripts. It's your letters of recommendation and personal statement that does not carry over, but you can carry everything else over.
I can't really remember what happened. It was all a blur. But I do remember I submitted it, I think, on the 13th of May. Because I was obsessive and I was checking over everything, making sure, my I's are dotted, my T's were crossed. So, but I wanted to get in right away, and everyone told me, I have a couple of friends in PA school right now, and they all said, Christina, like, get it in early. Absolutely. And I'm like, okay. And so I did. I mean, I was 2 weeks in, and it was already in, and I'm really glad I did it. And it was just one thing not to worry about,
I mean, I would say, and I'll just include this for anybody listening, basically it's the June 1st deadline. You want to have it done before June 1st. There is a second round, but, we look at the people who apply and get their everything done before June 1st. Some people are still taking a course or two, so they can't. But if you can, I mean, June 1st, that's the magic date that you want it done by.
Yeah, I mean, schools even this year, they're having issues getting rotations set up because of COVID. So even Mercyhurst, I think usually they interview July and they wait until September just because they're having issues with that. So, I guess I was panicking for a while thinking like, oh my gosh, like what if I'm going to be in like the 7th round of interviewees? But like, no, like it was okay. My one friend there, she said, no, like we're just having a lot of issues trying to get rotations set up. So I'm like, okay. So it definitely throws a little wrench into things. So don't panic.
And everybody's still going. I mean, we have so many that are still waiting for their first interview. And we tried to explain, unfortunately, obviously, because of COVID, a lot of rotations have been lost. Either the clinic just doesn't want to take it because they don't want to put their patients at unnecessary risk by having somebody extra in there that doesn't necessarily need to be there, or the policy doesn't cover it. The hospitals have just like, we can't take. So a lot of rotations have disappeared. And then, of course, you're always competing with other programs, other specialties that also need these. So it's always the case prior to COVID, but COVID has made it even more difficult.
Yeah, absolutely.
So any mistakes that you feel that you made that, like, to look back, it's like, oh, I should have done this sooner, or I would have done that, or...
Well, I already said it, but I would have contacted you sooner. And I think part of it, I'm going to be totally honest with you, I didn't want to pay for a service.
Sure.
And I feel like everyone's in that boat. Like you just paid the application process, and I paid for a ton of courses on top of undergrad. So I was just in the mindset where I just didn't want to have to pay any more for this. But I wish I had done it earlier, just for like peace of mind and more, because I did it pretty last minute with you in terms of practicing for the interview, which it was still fine. But definitely I would have just sucked it up and found you, and I mean you had wonderful ratings. Like I looked at you guys and you came up in my Google search and you were all PAs, and I was like looking at all your bios and I'm like, wow, like this looks like a really good site. Because even when you're looking for like mock interview sites, not all of them are created equal. So it was hard to find one that, looked truly legitimate. But I mean yours looked really good, and I'm like, I'm just gonna hold off for a little bit. And then I came back to it and I'm like, let's do it. Because if I hadn't done the mock interview, I don't think I would have gotten in. And I think you probably would agree with me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have let other people know that, yes, she did get in, but on her first go round, it didn't go so well.
It was terrible.
But we do try to emphasize, I know it is a service that you have to pay for, but think of how much you'll spend if you don't get it. So you
And
have to go back
I'm
do it
wrong
all over again.
about paying for it, but like I think that was my mindset at the time that kept me back. Yeah,
And we get that, and I mean, people contact us, hey, can you work with me? Can you? But on the other hand, it's we consider our service valuable and feel like,
absolutely.
we don't. We're trying to keep it at a fair price, so we're not trying to gouge or take advantage of anybody. But on the other hand, it's our time, and we provide. We're fairly successful, so I feel like it is worth it.
Just fairly. No, it was worth every single penny. I'm just so glad I did it. So I highly recommend.
Did you get the chance to shadow any PAs?
I did a couple PAs just kind of in passing when I was working with a couple physicians, and this was back in college. So I mean, this is probably 4 years ago.
Right.
But besides my own PAs, really the only shadowing that I've been able to do with my work schedule has been, online, which, isn't the best. I'd rather be in person, but I have been able to see a lot of specialties. And when they say that PAs are everywhere, they are. So I did see one in sleep medicine, which was really cool. Like I just never thought of that, like a PA being in that specialty. So it was just interesting. So most of it's been online, unfortunately.
So why did you pick Mercyhurst?
It's really close to home, and that's not the only reason. But for me, I realized that I really need my support system. So my boyfriend's here, which is number one for me. My family's here, and it's such a great school. My one girlfriend is the class president here, and she's like, Christina, it is amazing. And she calls the faculty her second moms. She loves them. She said they are just so sincere and they're wonderful, and I could see that in the interview. Like you just have that feeling. And I mean, even here, like there's two different hospital systems. So I mean, most of their rotations are local. They really prepare their students. And my friend Courtney's like, Christina, like it is the best school. And it's like, and she's like, I'm surprised more people don't apply. And I think last year they might have had one seat that was left unfilled. I don't know what the story is there, but it's like I'm just so excited. And she and I got along really well in undergrad, and she's the one that had the similar statistics to me. And so I knew if she loved it, I would love it too. But yeah, I mean, it's basically in the perfect location, and the faculty was just honestly amazing. I just loved it. The interview was a blast, and sometimes you can't really get to know people in interviews. Sometimes like they'll purposely like set up that wall. But I felt like in that interview, I got to know each faculty member because I got to like basically talk one-on-one with them, and it was amazing. I loved it. So I'm just so excited.
So you've already obviously alluded to it, but we'll go ahead. So we did work with you on your mock interview. And I mean, I know you've already talked about, but do you really feel that was very helpful?
It was the most important thing I have done all year. So, I mean, it was like, I can't emphasize this enough, but when you told me that you're in when you get an interview, you just have to basically get them to see who you are and how you interact with them. And can you hold a conversation? Are you friendly? That kind of thing. And like, that was, you hear that and you read it, but then when you're in the interview and you're able to make that small talk and you're able to have that conversation, I mean, that's everything. They got to know exactly what I was. I mean, for example, they were having technology issues, and this was their first round of interviews. So it was great because I was like, just so you know, you're doing great. Like, I know what it's like when technology isn't working. I'm a teacher. So it's just you're in panic mode when it's not working, and it's supposed to be working in the moment. Yep. And so that was just one way of starting a conversation. And actually, we didn't even finish a lot of the interview questions before we booted out of the breakout rooms. Yeah. So, like, I think I might have finished maybe, like, one question for each person, and they were supposed to ask two, because we would have, like, a little mini conversation to start off with. Right. And it was funny, but, like, we didn't finish the questions, but they got to know me as a person, and they could see, what's she going to be like with patients, and can she make light of a rough situation? Like, how does she handle that,
This is why I've been dying to do this interview, and I've told so many people, other candidates, what you're like, and this is what gets people in. Because again, once you got the interview, you're basically in. We know from an academic standpoint, you can pass the course, but what are you like? And some people, when you meet them, it's like, I don't know about this person. And then others like you are just like, oh my God, let's just give her a letter right now. She's fantastic.
It's interesting too, just from an applicant standpoint, when you are like interacting with the others in a group, like not a group interview, but you're seeing the applicants before you start, and you can just tell like which ones are, super like people oriented and which ones like aren't. You know what I mean? So
Yes,
it's interesting interacting. I remember I had a teacher moment. Um, it was funny because I'm like, "Hey, everyone," and it was just silence, and one person said hi. I was like, oh my gosh, and I wanted to like tell them like I'll wait until someone responds, like because I'm used to that mode. But I just like I wanted to have a conversation. I mean, you have like 8 other candidates here, but it was just funny. I had a teacher moment, but you can tell like who is willing to make an uncomfortable situation a little bit more fun and enjoyable. I mean, you're gonna have it all the time in healthcare.
And that's right. That's the whole point of it, is that's what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. That is your career. We all talk, I find it funny, people in their personal statements, and sometimes in the interview, they're like, I want to develop these lifelong relationships. Yeah, but you can't do that if you can't develop a relationship with me here in the interview. How do I think you're going to be with a patient that you don't know either? So, and plus they're coming to you at a bad time. We're just sitting here. We're at a good time. You're going to be talking to somebody that's having a problem, and you've got to make that connection. And if you can't do it here, the 15, 20 minutes that we have, yeah.
No, I agree for sure. But yeah, it's just interesting. You can read people pretty fast that way. But I had to really like, hone in my teaching phrases, and I had to try and like avoid the teacher voice too.
So, how many interviews did you do?
I had Mercyhurst was pretty much it. Even like job interviews was like.
Oh, I meant for PA program. I'm sorry.
Yeah, like Mercyhurst was the best.
Now, you said we worked with you on your mock interview session, but we did a couple of sessions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you feel that you would have been okay with just one session?
I would not have gotten into Mercyhurst if I had only done one. Like, it would have been a disaster. Like, the first time that you and I met, I was so nervous, and I pretty much was just regurgitating whatever I found on Google to say. And you even made that comment. You're like, oh, you're saying what every other student's saying. But the second time, though, I just felt so much more comfortable, because after that first session, it was almost like a pattern. And the biggest takeaway that I had was just to be yourself. So every single question that you asked me that first session, you asked me again the second, but I was honest that time, and it went so much better. And like you and I, we were having conversation after conversation just about, little things that I added and little things I said. So definitely the first session, if I had relied on that, would have been a disaster. Because I think I would have come away from that thinking, I am not prepared at all. You know what I mean?
Right. We do offer like a single, but it's usually for people who've been through this before and they just kind of need like a little refresher, but if you've never interviewed, just doing the one session typically is not, well, it's not as helpful as doing multiple sessions.
If I had just done the first session, I think my confidence would have been so low that I would have blown it. But the second session, though, I just felt so much better because you told me what my gut was telling me all along. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I'm definitely do the 2 sessions. It's so worth it.
Okay, so I see you have your ring light, too.
I do! My lighting was probably the best.
Look, it is. We try to tell everybody, and I'm sure others will be able to see, because your picture is just perfectly clear, good color. We really emphasize it makes a difference. It just sets that tone. I mean, it looks professional. You look like you've prepared rather than. I did an interview with somebody yesterday, and it really looked like it was black and white that I'm looking at.
Oh no, that's really bad. To be honest with you, ever since you told me about the ring light, I've just been very hyper aware of that when I'm watching like other, webcam videos. And I know it sounds terrible, but like when I interviewed, like some people had horrible lighting.
Right.
And I almost wanted to say something, but I also didn't want to be that guy, so I wasn't going to. But like, you're so right. It makes a huge difference. A huge difference, and also makes you just look more prepared.
It does. That's the point.
Yeah.
You do. You look far more prepared, and call it a psychological thing or subliminal, but in our head, just without even thinking, we're just like, oh, I like this person. I mean, it looks professional, right? You look prepared. I've already had this connection with you. And I look at, and then especially if I'm looking at multiple and I'm looking at the others, you just stand out. I mean,
Yeah.
look,
It was honestly $25. So best
Right.
$25 I ever spent.
Right.
It's totally worth it. And you're probably going to use it again besides just the interviews. So you might as well have it, especially right now where, we're pretty much virtual for everything and it's going to stay that way for a while, unfortunately.
Exactly.
But you might as well have it. It was,
Small investment.
I got it. Yeah.
And as you just pointed out, it is. You're going to be using this again.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Well, so this is, I mean, you've really pointed out a lot of things, but I'll just go ahead. So what tips do you have for anybody else who's now thinking about, hey, I want to apply to a PA program?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. I think the first thing is don't take everything you read online to heart and find someone who's going to look at you as an individual, not just, put you in the same category as everybody else who has to do the same thing, who has to talk about the same topics, but look at someone who can look at your strengths and kind of guide you on what to say. Even during the mock interview, you never told me exactly what to say. You just helped me say it in a certain way to convey that point. And I feel like sometimes people are like, well, I don't want to do a mock interview because I don't want to be told what to say. Mm-hmm. I highly disagree. That's not what happened at all. But yeah, I think the biggest thing that I struggled with was just reading all the stuff online, and I wasn't myself at all. I wasn't talking about my strengths. I was trying to talk about my patient care hours. Mm-hmm. And I have years of teaching experience that I'd rather talk about instead. And it was more valuable to me as a candidate. So I just really think, find someone who's a real mentor, who knows what they're talking about. You would be a great example. And they can play with your strengths and help you, basically plan out what you're going to say for your personal statement. I didn't do that. I wish I had. Same thing, interview. I think it's so important that you don't just give up hope because your profile doesn't match someone who, is 10 years older and they have 15 years of healthcare experience. They were, a medic in the Army and they have all this experience, and it's intimidating. It's intimidating to me coming in, but, I think that there's so much value, and when you come in, you're going to be on the same playing field. You're going to be learning the same stuff. You're going to be alongside each other. So I just don't want you to get discouraged if you feel like your stats aren't as good, so-called, as someone else's.
What about you're non-traditional? I mean, any recommendations for people who are thinking of making that transition from one career to this?
It takes time, but just take advantage of, classes. If right now is a great time to take advantage of classes if you can, because so many are online. And I think a lot of programs will be moving to online possibly in the spring. Once we get that second wave that we're talking about. I don't like saying that, but it's a reality. But I mean, it wasn't a fun year. Don't get me wrong. I was taking a full credit load with a full-time job, with a part-time job, and I'm a teacher. So I have basically my in-person job, and then I have all the hours after school planning. So it wasn't fun, but sometimes you just have to push through if the opportunity arises. So if you have a course that you can finish in a month and it's online, do it. I did a couple of those, and it's not fun. It really isn't. And people are going to be like, wow, you look really bad and exhausted. But it's temporary, and it's so worth it. This is the time to jump.
So one of the things that, we've told other students that we're working with about you, and maybe you don't realize or you don't see it, but you really exude confidence. And
thank you.
we find this, it's so important. Obviously, in healthcare, your patient needs to feel confident that you know what you're doing, even if you don't know. I'll go ask my supervisor position. But how could you share to other people? Because we keep trying to tell them, especially at the interview, you've got to be confident. And I really didn't have to tell you that. You just
Thank
have
you.
that.
I appreciate it.
What would you tell other people, how to bring out their confidence?
I think the leadership roles are probably the best thing that you can do. And even for me, I never was involved on campus, and that wasn't my style, but I coached because I did what I loved. I loved working with kids. So anytime that you're mentoring is such a great way of having leadership, because you're able to impact people's lives in many different ways. For me, teaching was a really big deal. So, being able to be an educator. So if you can tutor someone, that's great leadership experience. So it really just depends on what your interests are and your strengths. But I mean, truthfully, for me, I could not be a teacher and not be confident because those kids would trample all over me. Have you seen seventh graders? But I mean, not everyone's a teacher, and I understand that, but just definitely just getting yourself out there and giving yourself opportunities to have to be, assertive and having that responsibility and being willing to make mistakes. If you're not willing to take on those leadership roles, you're probably not going to make many mistakes and learn from them, in my opinion, at least. So definitely the leadership positions are important. And there's so many of them.
Well, I want to thank you again for doing this. I'm so happy for you. I know you're just still on cloud nine and so excited. And I know you're going to be just an amazing PA. I'd like to probably go to your graduation ceremony. You got so much energy, and it was fun working with you. It was very easy, but it was fun working with you. So
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
well, thanks for doing this interview. I'm sure everybody's going to find this extremely helpful and appreciate your time.
Thank you.